Welcome to Oregon Voters Digest, the program that brings forward the social and political issues that are important to people living here in the Pacific Northwest. And now, your host, Bruce Broussard.
Hello, you're watching another episode of Oregon Voters Digest. My name is Teresa Griffin-Kennedy. I'm a local Portland writer, and I have a really great show today. I have two very interesting writers, and they're both, I'm going to be interviewing them for the full hour. I have Stephanie Strange. She's a Portland writer, and she's also a musician and a singer, and she is basically the creator of Strange and the Familiars, which is a Portland band, and they're really good. I've listened to the videos that she has on YouTube. She writes her own songs. The music is really, really sharp. Her bandmates are just really skilled musicians, and I really like her songs. And I also have J.D. Chandler here today. J.D. is a Portland author. He's also my co-author for the book that we wrote together in 2016, Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland. And we're just going to talk about writing and the Portland writing scene and music in Portland and other things. So it's really nice to have you. Stephanie, welcome, and welcome JD to the show.
Thank you.
So I've got some questions that I've written down. Basically, I just wanted to talk about writing. I'm always interested in what people's process is. And Stephanie, you were born in Philadelphia. You were raised in New Jersey, and you mentioned earlier before the show that your parents got you vocal lessons when you were a child. I knew when I listened to you sing right away. I thought, this woman has gotten some vocal training.
I was very lucky to have vocal training. I was singing before I could speak, and my grandmother was always recording me, and they said we got to get her into lessons. She obviously loves it, and so I had lessons, and I hated it, but I was forced to do it for a long time, and then when I quit, my mom got me a guitar, and at that point I had luckily had teachers who, Brian Swingle here in Salem, he said to me, you are an opera singer. You need to study opera.
Right.
So I got to study that for a little while with him, and
I wondered.
Yeah.
I wondered about that. My daughter studied opera.
Yes, you mentioned that.
She's 26, and she started taking lessons when she was 16, and she studied, until like last year with Wade Baker of the Portland Opera, and she's also 5'8", like you, and for a long time Wade thought she was an alto or something. Are you an alto?
I am an alto.
I thought you were when I listened to the.
Got that.
It's got that wonderful lachrymose kind of deep sound.
Yes.
Altos. It's a very different sound.
It is. It's getting lower and lower as I get older. So I'm just kind of leaning into it.
It's so much more interesting than just being a soprano, because sopranos are a dime a dozen.
Sopranos are a dime a dozen. You heard it here, folks.
It's true. It's true. And it's interesting also, sometimes vocal coaches are, like Wade would tell my daughter and me, that your voice type is often determined by your body type. Taller women tend to have a lower voice. Not always, but sometimes. But anyway.
Interesting.
So you've been singing with Strange and the Familiars here in Portland for how long?
Oh, we've been around for about 3 years, two and a half, 3. Before that, I had a band called Steph Infection and the Heebie-Jeebies, and I was a little bit wilder back then, and that was I just thought it was hilarious, and I still think it's hilarious, but there was a lot of controversy over the name. The reason I switched it was because the name didn't really match the sound that was coming out of it. But I will always hold it dear, and I keep threatening when I'm older to start one of like a Jingle Cats sort of band, and to reestablish Steph Infection and the Heebie-Jeebies.
Jingle Cats?
It's sort of a Jingle Cats situation.
We had a couple of those tapes, my daughter and I. You write your own songs. I just think that's so wonderful. I love the slow, kind of ambient, maybe, kind of eerie sound. And my favorite song, of course, is Leave Me Alone or Take Me to Bed.
Oh, thank you.
That's like the best. I mean, I just love that. I love the saxophone and just the lyrics and all the other songs. I'm just really getting into them. And I'm just I just think you're fantastic, and I just wonder why you're not bigger than you are. We've got to make you big because you know it's wonderful to listen to really good music.
Thank you.
I'm not really heavy into the music scene in Portland, but I know quality singing and musicianship when I see it.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, it's I've been working in the music scene for a while and kind of figuring it out as I go, and trying to find my audience because I'm lyric heavy. I really put a lot of thought into lyrics. It's not pop music.
Right.
There's layers to the songs, and so I think it's been about hooking into trying to figure out who enjoys that kind of stuff. There's the darker, theatrical, playful music, and then there's some lighter, sweeter kind of sounds. And so I'm just, settling into my identity as a songwriter and clicking in with my bandmates and really figuring out what direction we want to go in. Because like any business, you make it what it is, and there's no one way to do it. You can learn from the people around you, but ultimately you have to forge your own path, and it's certainly not straightforward.
What I like about the songs is I like how you have really good timing. And you really take your time, and timing is really important when you're singing the songs that you sing, because like you said, the lyrics are special, and it's kind of it's almost similar in a way to Lana Del Rey too, and Cat Power also. Yeah, that kind of just taking your time,
Yes.
So, and you're also a writer, and you have a website, and it's called
Bellastrano.com. Yep.
And I read your essay called Dearest Portland. It was like a love letter to Portland, like almost like a Dear John letter.
Yeah.
It really made my day. It was probably 5 or 6 months ago,
I think that sounds right. Yeah.
And I read it. I just happened to come across it. It just came up on my wall, and you weren't on my friends list. And I read it, and I was like, I really like this, and I sent you a friend request.
That's right.
And I read it a couple times, and I could relate to so much of it, and it made me laugh. And it got shared like 40 times. People kept posting it, and because so many people could relate to it.
Yeah, there was a lot of there was some negative feedback because it seemed like it was criticizing Portland a little harshly, and I
saw
edges.
that. Yeah, you got a little bit of heat from it.
I got a little heat
from people that probably need to lighten up a little.
It's the humor is so important to me.
It is.
No matter what I'm talking about, that's how I've gotten through any of my struggles in life, and that is a huge piece of writing. Part of my writing is that you have to be able to step back and take everything with a grain of salt.
Sure.
But I've also learned that if there's heat in the kitchen, so if you're going to stand in it, you kind of have to just deal with it.
I loved it. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
So hello, JD.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
And you are working on your latest thing is The Werewolf of Portland.
I am. I'm going through kind of a change in my writing over this last year. I've focused on fiction almost completely. Everyone knows that crime and history have been my thing. I've got four books of Portland history dealing with crime mainly, and my 2 blogs. But the last couple of years, fiction has been more important to me, and so I've been writing that. And I'm combining the interest now with The Werewolf of Portland. It's set in Portland in the early 20th century. 1913 is the main year, but it's a horror story.
I've read most of it. It's really good. I really like it. It's definitely different. The tone is it's really colorful and really tight, and
Thank you.
Yeah.
My writing is really developing. It's changing quite a lot.
Yeah.
It's a whole different world writing fiction.
And you also have like the enviable data bank of all the of all the crime, all the murders in Portland.
I do know that. Yes.
You've been collecting like a lot of just really specific information, just data.
Well, for
on
20
murders.
for 20 years, I've been collecting Portland murders, and I have over 3,000 cataloged now since the 1850s up till the present.
Cool. And you wrote 3 books before we wrote Murder and Scandal and Prohibition Portland together in 2006.
Murder and Mayhem in Portland, Hidden History of Portland, which is non-crime related. It's more of the untold history of Portland. And then Portland on the Take, which is focusing on the 40s and the 50s. And then our book,
Yeah.
about Prohibition Portland, focusing on the 20s.
And you
mainly.
wrote Portland on the Take with J.B. Fisher?
With J.B. Fisher, yes. And we're working on a new project together right now, too.
And then Hidden History of Portland is the most successful of all the books.
It's probably my favorite one. It deals with the stories that I've always really wanted to tell. So it's stories of women's history and black history and Native American history, just the history that has never really been well told. And so I have told a little bit of it in this book.
And sometimes, because you do a lot of general research, you found out that there was this black firefighter in Portland that hadn't, that was buried in the Pioneer Cemetery and didn't even have a Lone Fir and didn't have a marker.
Well, that actually came from Hidden History of Portland, because they started using it at Madison High School for the local history class. And so Mr. Miller, who teaches the class, has me come in every year, and I'll be doing it again this year, to speak to the class, and then they take them on a field trip out to Lone Fir Cemetery. Lone Fir is in my neighborhood, and it is my favorite place in Portland. Some of the most interesting people who've ever lived in Portland are buried there.
I lived about a mile from there, and I would take my daughter there when she was really little sometimes, and we would walk around and look.
But I came across the story of... I can't even remember his name now. The first black Portland firefighter, and I went out to try and find his grave. I figured out where he was buried, and I went and tried to find his grave, and there was no stone on it.
Right.
And so I told the kids in the history class that, and I took them out and showed them where he was, and 3 or 4 of them took it on as a project, and they put a stone on his grave.
They got together. They did a fundraising.
Well, we kind of piggybacked on something the fire department was doing. They told the fire department about this, and they were going to put new headstones on 12 of the graves in the firefighter cemetery there. So they added a 13th, and it was
wonderful.
Our firefighter.
So just doing research and just sharing information, and now this.
Just telling these stories. If you start telling these stories, people get interested. They're interesting stories. And there's a lot of interesting people buried out there at Lone Fir.
Yeah.
And I like to show people around, so.
Oh, that's cool.
Research is really fun. It's unfortunately it's so expensive, and it's a lot of times it's just hit or miss.
Yeah.
But when you find something really great,
Yeah.
it's so thrilling.
Yeah.
Like, when I found those 2 letters about
Yes.
bootlegging.
In our book, yes, that was great. That was the smoking gun that we've been looking for.
Heart in my throat. I'll never forget that day.
Basically proving that the Portland Police Bureau was involved in selling illegal liquor.
So that it was like 2016, and I was doing research at the rec center, the PSU rec center, which the 5th floor is the Portland Archives and Records Center, and I was checking police personnel files from the teens and the 20s. And I found, I checked Leon Jenkins' personnel file, and I checked the other guy, the motorcycle.
You didn't tell me we were going to talk about this, and I didn't look up anybody's names before we came.
So I checked Leon Jenkins' personnel file, and I checked this other guy, I can't remember his name, I checked his personnel. Their personnel files had been sanitized, but they forgot.
The memo was destroyed. It was taken out of those files.
But they forgot that the secretarial pool always included copies to who wrote the memo, who the memo was sent to, and who it was regarding. So John Cordes.
Right.
Bottom of the barrel, Officer John Cordes.
The one that they were complaining about.
The one that they were complaining about. A do-nothing cop, probably on the take or whatever. Those 2 letters were in his file for 70 years. They sat in his file, and they were the smoking gun. And I looked at those, and I knew that the other 2 files had been sanitized. And I thought, I bet JD's going to want to see these 2 letters.
Well, what Cordes had done is he had fixed a parking ticket for Anna Schrader.
Yeah.
And Anna Schrader was persona non grata at the police department. In fact, there was a standing order that if anyone saw her car, put a ticket on it. And so he fixed one of those tickets, and he got in big trouble for that. And fortunately he did, because it preserved that memo, and it's proof that that Chief Jenkins knew that police were selling liquor.
Wow,
there was so much corruption in the Portland Police Bureau at the time, and just it was kind of amazing. But we're referencing the Anna Schrader story is also in the book Murder and Scandal and Prohibition Portland. And she wound up going missing in 1946, and we have a theory that she was murdered by someone in the early Portland Police Bureau.
Well, our theory is she's the victim of the torso murder.
Right.
Who was never identified.
Yeah. The torso murder, like 2 weeks after she went missing, there was a torso found floating in the Willamette River, and it was the body of a white woman who was about 45 or 50, and it matched her description to her weight and her height, which they can determine through doing body measurements and things.
Well, this was the big unsolved murder. This is
Yeah.
Portland's Black Dahlia case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
gruesome.
big news because they found body parts for several months.
Yeah.
And then they never identified her.
And the body parts, they found legs and arms, and then they found a skull, and they were all identified as belonging to the same body because they had all been wrapped with the same materials. But yeah.
But we're never able to identify her.
It's the oldest, the torso murder is the oldest cold case file in the state of Oregon. It's about 70 some years old, 72 years old now.
1946.
Yeah. So it's the oldest cold case file in the state of Oregon, and we have our theory on what happened, but no proof.
That's what that book is about. There's some proof.
Yeah. So I was wondering if you could tell us about your process with writing. Do you write in the morning? Do you write at night? Do you write drinking coffee? I don't drink alcohol and write, and I know some people that do. In fact, I remember a woman who was really adamant about that, and it's so stupid because it just doesn't work.
Right. Well, when I used to write music, I used to write drinking a lot, and I think the quality has improved since I quit drinking, but it's also not quite as easy as it used to be, so it doesn't flow in the same way. So I don't really have a method. I don't go about it in any kind of consistent fashion.
Sure. Yeah.
I like to be alone when I'm writing, but usually I just feel that tug of whatever subject matter is grabbing me, whether it's for music or for just a short story or a poem, and rush to a computer and just sort of vomit it all out, and then revisit it later and look at it and kind of try to figure out where it fits and how it comes together after that.
For me, I really love revision because that's the fun part. I'll go over a chapter 50 or 60 times because I want to get it just right, just really tight.
Yeah.
And but I agree that I don't think everyone has their own process. And I read this article one time from Poets and Writers magazine, and there was this poet guy who was in his 60s, and this was probably 10 years ago, and he was some white guy from back east, and he had this theory that you have to get up at 7 a.m. every morning and write until noon, and you have to do it his way or you'll just never be a writer. And I thought, you jerk.
Right.
That's what I people like that, I'm just back off, because anyone who makes those kinds of assertions that you have to do it this way, it's a red flag for someone who's not flexible, for someone who's not open-minded, and I just avoid that, because there are times when I'll write every day for a month. There have been times when I've written every day for 8 hours for 3 months, and then I'll take 8 weeks off.
Right.
What about you, JD?
I think daily writing is important. I think that keeping the flow. I actually, Stephen Barnes, a science fiction writer that I took a class from, said that the key to writing is to commit to writing one sentence a day. Because by the time you write that first sentence, you've done all of the hard work that's involved. And if you write one sentence, you're good, you've hit your goal, you can stop there if you want, but you usually don't.
And if you're like me, if you're on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you're definitely writing more than,
Right.
I mean, I just write, social media is kind of fun. And nowadays it seems like you have to just be on every form of social media to promote your writing because it's so competitive.
I don't really count that myself. Because writing to me is really about the project that you're working on. And my writing really kind of changes depending what I'm working on. When I was writing history books, it was a whole different thing from what I'm doing now. Now I like to write in the morning, and I like to write for several hours at a time, usually sometimes 5-6 hours at a time. So I can't do that every day, but I do that about 4 days a week. And that, it really does build your word count.
Yeah.
It flows that way. And I always used to when I was writing fiction, I always used to like to dream, think about my story before I went to sleep and dream the scene I was going to write. But I don't do that right now because I'm writing nightmares, and I don't really want to have nightmares. I don't want to dream about the werewolf of Portland. So it's a whole different process every time I do a project.
I feel like I'm 52 now, and I feel like my writing really changed when I turned 50. It really kind of coalesced in a way that it hadn't before. And it was probably about 4 or 5 years ago when I started dreaming phrases, and I still every once in a while will dream a phrase and wake up and be like, wow, that's so bizarre. Where did that come from? And write it down. And I've incorporated some phrases that I've dreamed. I've incorporated them in poems and things. But yeah, I found myself that I do my best writing if I am either really happy or really miserable, or if I think something is really funny, and I'm working on a novel and I have almost 60,000 words written. I'm working on chapter 18, and there's going to be 20 chapters. Talionic Night in Portland. It's a comic romp. It has a lot of graphic sex and violence, more sex than violence, but it's not for everyone, because I'm just completely letting my imagination just go wild. I wouldn't say it's crazy, but there is some graphic content, so it might not appeal to everyone, but I'm kind of amazed that I've stuck with it this long. I've been writing it for about 10 months, but I definitely don't adhere to a daily regimen, in fact, I took about 2 weeks off of writing anything on it, just because sometimes you have to do that.
Well, taking breaks is important, I think.
Yeah. But
I write a lot of different things, so each time it's something different. I write songs too.
Oh.
I don't sing, but I do write songs.
Nice, very nice. Lyrics or the whole that compose
Lyrics
everything?
mainly.
Yeah.
Recently I've gotten into doing some of the music too, but I'm not really a musician.
Right. I found that as a musician and a writer, things ebb and flow, and my creativity always wants to have an outlet, but that does change. So sometimes I'll go a long time without writing, and I'll think, well, I guess I'm not writing anymore. And then the writing will come back out. Same thing with music. Oh,
It doesn't really go away.
that was a good run. I guess it's over. And then, I just have to be patient with everything and gentle and let it come as it comes.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Although the discipline of writing every day, that would probably be a good exercise.
I read your recent essay, Pink Blankets and Black Aprons?
Yes.
Black Aprons and Pink Blankets. That was so clever.
Oh, thank you.
And you have kind of an interesting way of writing. It takes a minute to realize your, what narrative voice you're writing in.
Right.
And I liked that. It was a very short essay about a homeless person under a pink blanket.
Right.
And the end, of course, you say, no
soft hearts here.
Right.
Just pink blankets and black aprons.
But of course, the reader knows that the writer totally has a soft heart.
Right. Right. A lot of that writing has come from working at the cafe that I've worked at for 7 years, and just seeing all these different, it's in the Irvington district, so I was just talking to somebody today, and on the left side of me is some of the most concentrated wealth in Portland, and then on the right side of me is some of the most destitute population in Portland, and they come together in this epicenter, which has been an amazing source of inspiration, heartbreaking a lot of times, but it's not too hard. A lot of times I would just spit something off at work, just in the, the heat of the moment, and then revisit it later and realize that that's something that I wanted to put out there that was important, but processing and helping quantify these experiences and, making it a little bit okay.
One thing I like about your writing is you don't write overly long essays. I get really involved, and I'm like, it's ridiculous. 25, 35, 50 pages. And I finished writing an essay about, I found out recently that my first love hanged himself in February, and that was and it happened 2 years ago, and I was really shocked and really surprised because he never seemed like the kind of person to do that. And I wrote this essay, I think it's 79 pages, but it was so therapeutic because I really just had to get out my memories of him and the experiences that we had over the years. And so definitely writing is like therapy, but I noticed that a lot of your essays are not very long. They're kind of shorter, and that's something I've been working on.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a strength to be able to write a short essay, and it's not too great if you're so self-involved that you want to.
I think that's something we learn from writing songs, wouldn't you say?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, you lose people.
Right.
And I always thought I erred on the side of, I usually have to flesh things out a little bit more because I tend to get right to the point of it. Not that I have a problem with using too many words sometimes, but yeah, lyrically, you have to keep it very succinct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that is good for essay and fiction both.
So what do you like about Portland's writing scene, and what frustrates you about Portland's writing scene? Because I've got my own complaints. I think Portland can be, I think that there's a lot of people in Portland that are entrenched in the whole writing scene, and they're treated like royalty, and I think there's a lot of favoritism, a lot of cliques. So it can be kind of a hostile environment sometimes. And I actually wrote an essay about 2 years ago, snubbing Portland and the Portland writing scene, something like that, about all the times I'd been snubbed over the years by various writers or publishers, etc. What are your views on the Portland writing scene? Do you feel like it's welcoming?
Well, I'll let you answer that one first because I don't have a lot of experience with it. I have experience in the music scene and just starting to foray into the writing scene. So,
Well, the thing I like about Portland is there are a lot of good writers here.
Yes.
And I know a lot of good writers. I write. I don't know. I'm not that active in doing readings and things like that. I have at different times, but I'm not running into some of those same things. Although it's always hard for someone to break in. No matter how good a writer you are, it can be very difficult to get attention and for people to read what you're doing. So maybe it's because of the competition, I don't know. But I like the fact that there are a lot of good writers in this town, and so there's a lot of support in that way too.
There are a lot of great writers. It gets frustrating, I think, when you submit constantly, to places here in town and even to places out of state. And I think the constant rejection, because there's so much rejection. It's much like if you were an actor or an actress or...
Well, that's just the writer's lot. Writers have always had to deal with that. I don't think there's ever been a generation where they didn't say exactly that same thing.
Yeah, and I think for my husband and I, Don DePay is my husband, we finally just decided in 2015, after submitting his police memoir to various places and realizing that the only publishing company that really took it seriously was the publishing company at PSU. What are they called? I can't remember their name. The PSU publishing company, they looked at it for a few weeks and then they passed because it was really controversial. So we decided to create our own publishing company, which is Oregon Greystone Press. And I have learned, since 2015, I have learned so much about indie publishing and everything that you have to know. And I've learned a lot about editing and proofing and just the whole 9 yards. It's been a wonderful experience because I think we got to a point where we realized we wanted to promote our own writing, and I think that we got tired of feeling helpless.
Well, I think that the whole writing career is so in flux right now that I think everything is on the table. People are publishing their own books, and sometimes that's good, sometimes it's terrible.
Oh, sure.
I've seen there are a lot of books that probably shouldn't be published.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're just not ready.
Yeah.
But and they are getting published, but they're even being read. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
With Werewolf of Portland, I'm trying something really new. I'm serializing it. It's new because people aren't doing it now, but it's what people used to do about 100 years ago. I'm serializing. So about every 3 weeks, there's a new episode of Werewolf of Portland. So it's going to take me about a year and a half to put the whole thing up.
Yeah.
And I'm writing it as I go because I want to have more of an interaction with the audience. It comes from an experience I had about 30 years ago when I was in the Army. I had one of the first versions of the internet that was available to me. It was a military internet. And it didn't have all of the things that we have in the internet now, but we had instant messaging and we had shared files. So I could be typing. As soon as I hit enter, everybody on my network could read it. And so part of my job at that time was keeping people awake. because we would work all night, and sometimes there was really nothing to do. So I would write these stories. They were pastiches, old, like Sherlock Holmes story, but done in military jargon. And with recognizable characters that I worked with. And people loved it. They really enjoyed it, and I really liked having that immediate feedback. Because at times, when I would be right down to the end of a story and we were at the end of the shift and people were really hoping I'd be able to finish this before we had to go home, I would hit enter on every sentence. And I would be getting instant messages from people, sentence by sentence, as I was writing. And that was fun. It's an exciting type of writing, and I'm hoping to recreate a little bit of that with my serial, although I'm way ahead.
How many do you have? How many chapters do you have?
I have, there are 5 episodes that are up now. The first 3 are available on my Werewolf of Portland site, and then the rest of them are going to be on my Patreon site. You'll have to subscribe to read. But I've written 15 episodes. So I'm quite a ways ahead. And the other thing I'm doing with it is I have an artist who's doing the illustrations. So I have original charcoal drawings for each episode. And I think that having the graphic and the
She's
words,
really good.
I think so too. I love what she's doing with it.
She's really good. What's her name?
Caitlin McMorris.
Right. She's on my friends list.
She's a recent college graduate from Southern Oregon University. And she's really a very talented artist.
Yeah, I've seen them. They're wonderfully ambient and just.
Well, she's really capturing the feel of my writing, and I love that.
Yeah. So, how do you guys access humor? Do you focus on humor in your songwriting?
Humor just kind of comes for me. It's I can't take anything too seriously because at that point I lose myself. And I figure if I'm losing myself, then I'm losing the audience. Sometimes my humor is lost on people. That happens a lot, especially when it's edgier. But that's just been a huge way that I've dealt with everything. I make fun of anything that I can, myself first and foremost. So it's really tied together with everything else that I
like your humor. I mean, and I definitely see that in some of your Facebook posts and in your essays on your website. And humor is so important. And I just get so tired of people that have such a hard time with humor.
There's a lot of people that have a hard time with humor or don't know how to take something heavy and the humor with it, which is the only way I can take heaviness is with some humor.
I have, I should have brought it with me, but it's this book on censorship that I got years ago. It's an anthology book that I found somewhere on censorship, and I just love it. It's one of my very favorite books because I think so much censorship is happening lately just in American culture. You know, it's shifting, and everything's becoming too politically correct to laugh at. But I love humor. And in my novel that I'm working on, that I'm almost finished with, I focused on humor in the first few chapters. And there's about 3 chapters that are really dark. But some of the funny chapters I thought were really funny. And I read them to Dawn and to a few other people, and they seemed to like them too. Just kind of physical humor, just making fun of you know, the ways that men and women relate to each other. And I think a lot of that comes with just experience and just having lived and failed in various ways in one way or another. And you can kind of see the funny cynicism, you know.
Yeah,
but,
I think things become funnier the older you get.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's really important to just laugh, to be able to laugh at things. But like, what books do you read? What type of books do you enjoy reading?
Oh, I read everything. I love science fiction. I love fiction. Nonfiction. I read about the brain a lot. Let's see, what am I reading right now? I'm reading a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, and it's about neuroplasticity. But then I'm also reading with it, Dear Friend, I'm writing to you in your life from my life by a Japanese author. And it's this kind of loose, poetic writing, essays that don't really wrap up in any firm way. It's really interesting. A friend recommended it. But, you know, I love Ray Bradbury and, You name it. I also love children's books. I love children's authors, like those kinds of things. Anything that sucks you into the fantasy world.
One of my favorite children's books, actually, I checked out when I was at Chapman Elementary in the 70s over in Northwest Portland. It's called The Rotten Book. I can't remember who wrote it, but Stephen Kellogg illustrated it. It's hysterical, and the reason it's so funny is because Stephen Kellogg illustrated it. It's just one of the best children's books I've ever read. It's about this little boy who hears his parents talking at breakfast about this kid that they know that was in trouble, and he kind of tries to figure out what he could have done that was so bad, and it's really funny. But it's really only funny. The writing is all right, but it's really funny because of the illustrations. But yeah, I love children's books too. Yeah. And I've recently been getting into reading domestic noir. So Gillian... what is it, Gillian Murphy? She wrote Sharp Objects, and she also wrote, she writes these really kind of graphic, she wrote Gone Girl. I read that. Wow, that was really intense. But I tend to read fiction and nonfiction. I haven't gotten into reading sci-fi because I'm afraid if I do, I'll like fall in and be lost forever.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, no, nothing at all. Nothing like tumbling through space.
I need to get like a list of like 10 of the most classic sci-fi novels that you need to read. Okay, we're almost done with the first half of the show, so we will be taking a break, and then we'll come back and talk about more writing.
You are watching Oregon Voters Digest. This program can be seen again on these channels on these dates and times. Tell a friend.
We get to see him as a child.
Okay, we're back. We're back on Oregon Voters Digest, and my guests today are Stephanie Strange. She's a writer and a musician and singer. She has a wonderful voice, and she's on YouTube. You should definitely look her up. Her band is called Strange and the Familiars. And we have J.D. Chandler, who is my co-author for the book we wrote in 2016, Murder and Scandal in Prohibition Portland, and a local author and crime historian. And we're basically just talking about writing. So I found some really cool questions on my phone, which is nicer because now I don't have to write them down. So I'm one of those writers who has to write. If I don't write, I'll go crazy. So writing for me is like a form of therapy. I am able to, you mentioned vomit out. I'm able to like just really regurgitate out my emotions and fears and thoughts, get it out on paper, and I just feel cleansed. I feel better. So what do you think? Is writing a gift or a curse?
I think it's a gift because otherwise, like you said, you'd be crazy.
Yeah, it's true.
There's no other way but to get it out.
I think writing might be crazy.
Yeah. Well, yes, so is playing music.
I think writing a novel is a form of mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm working on my 5th novel now, and I'm really convinced it is a form of mental illness. But it is the one area of my life where I really have joy. Mm-hmm. maybe the only area in my life where I really have joy. But it's a very joyful process. When you're writing and it's flowing and it's working, it feels very good.
It's true. I mean, I can remember a few years ago when I was having to work on an essay, when I was still a student, a graduate student, having to work on an essay and having to finish it, not being very happy. Sometimes I would get into the groove. I would get into that flow. And you look at the clock and it's like 10 o'clock. Oh gosh, it's 10 p.m. And then you write some more and then you look over and it's 4 a.m. and you're like, what?
Yeah.
Where did the time go?
The time does go.
It's a wonderful moment to get lost in.
Yeah.
When at 18, I found out I have degenerative disc condition, and I was in a lot of pain. I had back surgery, and I found that the only thing that really helped was writing music. The time would fly and my pain would disappear.
Sure.
And that's when I knew that I was also crazy and also committed to being committed. And because if something can take you out of that kind of pain, then it's got to be powerful. It's got to be doing good things for your brain.
Yeah.
I think that's really true, because it doesn't really matter what mood you're in.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you're in pain. It all just flows into the writing.
It does.
In fact, my book, Life is a Breeze, includes a lot of bone pain because I was experiencing pain when I was writing it. So my characters feel a lot of pain, and it works.
Right. Yeah, I don't think darkness and humor, I don't think that should be shied away from, because these are all things that are universal. Everybody feels physical pain and depression and anger and sadness. So to not include it in your subject matter, to tiptoe around it, is not being true to art. And there's, to me, as someone who takes in art, I don't find that titillating or interesting at all. I want the whole thing.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. I've got some more interesting questions.
On the other hand, writing can be an extremely frustrating experience.
Especially when it doesn't come and you need it to come.
Well, when it's coming, but it's not right. That's when I have a hard time with it. Because I spent about 3 hours just the other day writing, and I thought, none of this is any good. I'm going to throw it all away. And sometimes you go back the next day and read it, and it's not quite as bad as you thought. And sometimes it is.
Well, that part of it, I feel like, I'm not a visual artist, but I feel like is like a painter. They say that a lot of it is not necessarily what you can do, but how you can fix your mistakes.
Right.
So there's something fun about, this is not what I intended, but I'm going to make this something else.
Right.
That's what I find really interesting about a lot of writers. Like for me, I write, poetry and fiction and nonfiction, but I also paint.
Right.
And I love to paint. I haven't painted in a while, but I paint abstract. And it's a really different part of your brain. And I always feel like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm just hallucinating, but I always feel like maybe it's like the left side of my brain that seems more activated when I'm painting. Because the right side of my brain seems like more like I probably got it backwards, but that's how I feel. But painting is, painting. I love to paint, and it's interesting when you meet writers who either write and paint, or write and do music, or write and dance. I know some writers that are dancers, although that's pretty rare. But I feel like my writing has improved since I've been painting, which has only been about almost 5 years. But only abstract. I'm really passionate about abstract because it's just so mysterious, and there's that quality of the unknown and fixing mistakes. And I think also with painting, it's just, a matter of approaching it from the standpoint of it's just layers, adding layers to it.
Well, I think that there is a connection between those things. I paint and I do music as well, and I sometimes even dance. But I find when I write, a lot of times it takes something away. It's like you are getting something out when you write. But painting is exactly the opposite. And painting helps kind of refill that space. And I think music does that a little too.
Yeah. What would you guys say if you had any advice to give to young writers? Because I ask this because when I was an undergraduate, I was at Portland State, and there were a couple of writing instructors, both were women, who were really notorious for kind of dashing the hopes and dreams of young writers. And there was a particular poetry professor who was really awful, who would reduce younger women in their 20s to tears and tell them, you're never going to be a poet, you're never going to be a writer unless you do this, this, and this. I have really strong opinions about encouraging and supporting young writers, because I remember how sensitive I was in my 20s, and it makes me really furious when older writers are cruel to younger writers.
Well, I do agree with the idea that if you can be discouraged from anything, you should be. So
That's interesting.
if you can't be discouraged, then you're going to do it. If you
Yeah.
can be discouraged, go do something else. You know, maybe not everybody has to be a writer, but writers deal with, and maybe it's true in the other arts as well, but in writing very particularly, we deal with fear and self-doubt.
Yes.
We have the fear that we're not going to be able to, well, first there's the fear that we're going to expose too much of ourselves.
Right.
Because if you write, people know things about
Yes.
you. And know or think they know things about you.
That is so true.
Or assume that they know things about you. The self-doubt is that we might not be able to communicate with words. What if our words aren't adequate to say this? And so every time you write, that's what you're struggling against. So the best advice is write.
Yeah.
If you can be discouraged, go do something else.
That's good advice. You know, you wrote the introduction for my book, which comes out in October, Burnside, Field Lizard, and Selected
I love
Stories.
your stories, yeah.
It's a book of short stories. And I remember when you wrote the introduction, you said something about me, you were describing me, and you said that you described me as the easy acceptance of others, you know.
Yes.
Basically, I don't worry, I don't worry about what other people think of me. And it's true.
I think you sometimes worry too much about what other people
I
think
sometimes
about you.
do, but there's also this part of me that's just like, screw you. I'm going to write what I want to write about, and if you don't like it, you know, okay. But I remember reading that and thinking, really? I was really surprised by that when you had written that. It's a great introduction, but my book comes out October 2nd.
And the short stories are great. If you haven't read them, do.
I haven't, yeah.
There are 5 short stories, and the main story, Burnside Field Lizard, is about, you know, people that I saw in the 90s when I lived over off of 12th and Burnside and Sandy Boulevard. There's the rock climbing place right there where Sandy and Boulevard used to meet, but don't anymore.
Sandy and Burnside.
Yeah, Sandy and Burnside. There was an empty lot there, and now it's the rock climbing place. And there were prostitutes that would congregate there and drug addicts that would congregate in that empty lot. And so it's kind of a story about that. But it comes out October 2nd, and I wrote the final story, which actually turned out to be my favorite.
It might be my favorite one, too.
And that was The Convalescent Home in the Doug Fir Wood, which was just a very unexpected story. I just kind of conjured it. It was really surprising. I didn't think about it for years. You know, I thought about Burnside Field Lizard for a long time before I wrote it. And the main character, Darvella, is really a composite of probably 5 or 6 women that I saw, you know, in that area. But anyway, you wrote the introduction, and you wrote a great introduction, and I appreciate that. Anyhow, I have some other interesting questions here. What are your thoughts about nonfiction versus fiction? I mean, what do you prefer?
Well, I've done a lot of both now, and I enjoy writing nonfiction. It's different for me, though, because I don't have a lot of that self-doubt with nonfiction that I do with fiction. I always go into a nonfiction story with the idea, if I can figure out what the story is, I can tell it.
Right.
With fiction, it's always a doubt of whether you'll be able to tell the story. And it's always a feeling that maybe my writing isn't up to this story, or this story is more important and I'm not going to be able to do it,
Right.
or I'm trying to do something different. I do try doing different things with fiction. As you've noticed with Werewolf of Portland, my writing is completely different. It's not like anything I've written before. And I like that.
What
I
are
think
your-
I'm going to go back and rewrite some of my other things with the lessons that I've learned from this.
What are your thoughts about muses? Do you have a muse? Do you feel like they even exist? Because I have been I've experienced times when I've been writing for a long time, and I'll literally hear something like in my ear. It'll just come to me, and I don't feel like it came from me. I feel like it came from outside of me, and it'll just come in my head, and I'll write it down. So do you feel like there are muses out there? What are your thoughts on muses?
What do you think?
Well, I think that muses are everywhere. I think we find muses in each other and in situations. I think that you can be creative on your own for a while, but that's nothing, that doesn't really feed you. And I know the feeling that you're talking about. I think a lot of artists do, where it's something bigger and it's kind of getting pushed through your filter and you get to express something in that way. But I've found that muses are a lot of times people who hurt us or that we brush up against, and we learn their stories, and that's really the muse. It's a beautiful image that it's a ephemeral, glittery being, but I think that's, we find that in each other.
I sometimes feel like I'll write things, and especially after I've revised them and really polished them, I'll feel like it was just something that was always written, and that I didn't really write it. It was just always out there. It just kind of existed out in the world, and I just helped bring it out. That sounds crazy, but
Sounds right to me.
But also, I can definitely relate to what you're saying, JD, about self-doubt and about worrying about what people will think of you, because the novel I'm writing, Talionic Night in Portland, for a long time I didn't really know where it was going, and I'm writing chapter 18 now. I have 18 to finish and 19 and 20 to finish, but it wasn't until I started writing about chapter 17, which I wrote, and is one of the longer chapters, I realized both characters are survivors of sexual abuse. And then I thought, for a long time, do I really want to do that? Do I really want to focus on that? Because I know a lot of people who were sexually abused, and I was sexually abused as a child, and a couple of times. And so I thought, do I really want to focus on that? And it was like, I really struggled for about a month writing this chapter, because it's really graphic. And but then by the time I finished it, I thought, this feels right.
Well, I don't think as writers we always have the choice of the theme. I think that we write what we write, and it is what it is. And that may not be what we intended, it may not be what we thought it was, and it may not even be what we think it is, because every reader is going to bring something different to it. But the stories of our lives are, a friend of mine described it as grist for the mill. Everything that happens to us is grist for the mill.
Right.
And that is. What happened to us is what we have to work with. It's our raw material. I'm kind of an animist, so I think that everything has a spirit. So I guess in that sense there have to be muses, but I don't know if they're really something separate from us.
Yeah. But I was thinking about what you mentioned earlier, about how much you reveal of yourself in your writing. I definitely see that.
And you do reveal about yourself, but people also assume that you're revealing things that are not really about you.
That's true. That's right.
Yeah.
Because in a couple of my short stories, in one of the Reno story in Burnside Field Blizzard, that's a wild story, and it's very sexually graphic, but I didn't do it. It wasn't me.
Right.
I knew a couple of women who lived like that, which is all right. I mean, I'm not judging them at all. But I definitely see that part where you write something and then people are like, was that you? Are you writing about your life?
People assume that you're always writing about yourself, and in some sense you might be, but especially with fiction, it doesn't have to be your experience to write it.
Right, to the experiences that you've had do, I mean, I think they inevitably inform
Of course they do.
what you're writing, but there's something protective about putting something really raw out, and then, but also it not being your direct experience, because that way you get to kind of take it and throw it on the table, but it doesn't have to be so personal.
One thing I've learned, especially like in the last year, I think the process of writing a novel is so daunting for some people. How do you do it? I just wrote an outline, and I didn't write an outline about each chapter, what happens in each chapter. I wrote an outline with dialogue, so that dialogue would kind of inform the way each chapter went. And I wrote 20 sections, 20 chapters of this outline with dialogue, and that's how I kept going, and that's how I realized, how I determined what would happen in the novel. And then I just kept writing chapter by chapter, and my book is probably going to be about 205 pages. But I think more people, more writers, could actually write novels if they didn't allow themselves to feel afraid of the actual task of writing a novel.
Well, it's kind of a daunting task. To think about writing a novel is intimidating.
Yeah.
To do it is insane.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing, and probably not everyone should do it. But those of us who do it,
Yeah.
it can be a really valuable experience.
It is true.
And I love to read, so
Yeah.
I want good things out there to read.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. As a novice writer, I haven't published anything, and I didn't think of myself as a writer until this last year when I got a lot of really positive feedback. But it's the idea of writing a novel is really daunting.
It is.
And it's interesting being in the social media age because that's really helped because I'll put things out piecemeal
Yeah.
and then being able to tie it together after the fact. It's an interesting thing. I'm seeing more writing like that, like Twitter
Right.
novels.
This
Yeah.
is I think this might be the way we're going.
It's
and it's exciting.
yeah, you are into it. Yeah.
Well, like my husband's police memoir, we had a really great young editor help us, Jonathan Stark. He contributed a great deal. And one thing he did was he knew where to cordon off the content. And so we ended up with all of these little vignettes. And so writing a novel chapter by chapter or as vignettes, 3 or 4 pages is really, it's doable,
Well, to me, a novel is like writing songs. It's about the drama. It's finding the dramatic moment and illustrating it. So you don't have to say everything in a novel. In fact, a novel that says everything is probably not worth reading. Because if you start when you get up out of bed and you brush your teeth and you have breakfast and you catch the train to work and you spend the day at work, who wants to read that?
Yeah. Well, and as a reader and a listener, I don't want to be spoon-fed.
Right.
I want to be engaged,
Right.
and I want to be able to put my own experiences to it. And so, as an artist, I've never felt the need to spell everything out.
And
Yeah.
that's an important lesson. That's a really important lesson to learn. You have to trust your audience.
Right.
Yeah, and you have to know what not to reveal, and I'm slowly getting to that point. And I'm also gaining confidence in the sense that when I was younger and in college and involved in writing workshops, they can be really vicious, and the people that were the most vicious were generally not the best writers.
Well, and that
You know.
I think that's true.
Yeah. So yeah. So what projects do you have planned for the future? You're doing a lot of music.
I'm doing a lot of music. I am hoping to wrap up. I've been writing cafe memoirs, kind of through Facebook, kind of off Facebook as well. And so that I'm hoping to get out and figure out either how to self-publish or find a publisher. And then I have a new album coming out, and I've got a lot of big shows.
There's something about your writing that kind of reminds me of Jennifer Robin in a way.
Jennifer Robin. I'm not
Jennifer
familiar.
Robin, she wrote this great book about Portland, and she was published through Feral House.
Okay.
So if you're writing something that's nonfiction about your own life experiences, and definitely you should look at Feral House.
I will.
They're really good.
They're an interesting publisher.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. But and what do you have planned?
Well, I'm doing Werewolf of Portland right now. I've got Life is a Breeze as my science fiction novel that needs to be rewritten. So that's my next step. And I'm working on a video series with J.B. Fisher, my co-author on Portland on the Take. It's Portland's Unsolved Mysteries. So we're looking at some of the famous unsolved crimes from Portland history. We've got the first 5 episodes just about ready. It's going to be a YouTube series, about 12-minute episodes. And it's fun. It's if you're interested in mysteries and you're interested in Portland history, it's really a lot of fun. We're starting with Emma Merlotten, the first most famous unsolved mystery in Portland from the 1880s, and the first 5 of them are before 1910.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today, and this is Oregon Voters Digest, and we'll see you next time. We'll see you next week. Thanks for joining us.
Hold on.